The 1770s were not simply another chapter in the history books, they were the violent awakening of a continent that refused to remain a reflection of Europe. In this brief 10-year span, the map of North America became a chessboard where millennial empires and colonial powers played their last great game for supremacy. The air grew heavy with the smoke of rhetoric and gunpowder. What began as a murmur of discontent in Boston's taverns and Virginia's assemblies erupted into a defiant cry that fractured the most powerful empire on the planet. We witnessed the birth of a new nation, the United States of America, a republic born from the paradox of liberty and war. But while the world looked toward Philadelphia and Yorktown, the rest of the continent vibrated with transformations just as seismic. To the south and west, New Spain extended its missions and presidios into the mists of California, attempting to consolidate an empire that stretched from southern jungles to the snows of Alaska. To the north, the ashes of New France still gave warmth to an identity that refused to vanish under the British. And in the deep heart of the territory, beyond the paper borders of European maps, beat the true power of the land. From the wooden castles of the Iroquois Confederacy in the northeast, to the Apache riders who dominated the canyons of the Southwest, the indigenous nations were no mere spectators. They were diplomatic and military powers that, through their alliances and resistance, shaped every imperial decision, defending a home they had inhabited since time immemorial. Today, we delve into the decade when the balance of the world was broken, a decade of shifting borders, of Russian navigators defying the cold of the Pacific, and of revolutionaries dreaming of the impossible. Welcome to the history of North America in the 1770s, the decade that changed everything. The echo of the 7 Years' War, 1756 to 1763, still reverberated across the continent. That global conflict had redrawn the map of the Western Hemisphere and sealed the fate of entire kingdoms. Defeated France had withdrawn almost entirely from the mainland. Canada, Acadia, and the territories east of the Mississippi no longer bore the Bourbon lily but the British flag. Only the tiny, windswept islands of Saint Pierre and Miquelon remained as faint reminders of French ambition in the northern seas. Great Britain emerged as the dominant power in the north. It ruled the Atlantic 13 colonies, newly acquired Canada, the Ohio territories, and East and West Florida. Yet this dominance was largely cartographic. Vast interior regions remained beyond effective British control. Burdened by war debt, London introduced new fiscal and administrative measures that would soon ignite profound unrest in its American colonies. Facing Britain stood another continental titan, Spain. The viceroyalty of New Spain encompassed immense territories, from Chiapas to California, from the deserts of Chihuahua to the plains of Texas, and from the missions of Sonora to the settlements along the Rio Grande. After receiving western Louisiana from France in 1763, Spain controlled the entire Mississippi Valley, supporting its dominion with a far-reaching network of presidios, roads, missions, and garrisons stretching across remote and often ungovernable lands. On the far northwestern frontier, a third actor was beginning to cast its shadow, the Russian Empire. Navigators, traders, and fur hunters had begun establishing outposts in the Aleutians and along the Alaskan coast. Though small in number, these settlements signaled the beginning of a future struggle for control of the North Pacific. Yet no European empire ruled the continent's interior. From the forests of the Great Lakes to the sweeping Central Plains, from the Appalachian Mountains to the canyons of the Southwest, North America remained, above all, the homeland of powerful and sophisticated indigenous nations whose political, territorial, and military systems had shaped the continent long before European arrival. In the northeast, the Iroquois Confederacy remained a formidable diplomatic and military force. Their alliances, trade networks, and strategic influence shaped every British and French decision for more than a century. They were partners, rivals, and negotiators, but never subjects. In the southeast flourished the so-called Five Civilized Nations: the Creek, Choctaw, Chickasaw, Seminole, and most notably the Cherokee, advanced agricultural societies with complex governance, active diplomacy, thriving trade, and the ability to mobilize warriors swiftly. These nations balanced colonial ambitions against their own territorial aspirations with striking political skill. Across the Central Plains, the Comanches ruled the vast region known as the Comancheria, enforcing their authority with unmatched horsemanship and lightning-swift warfare. No European empire truly controlled this land. It was the Comanches who defined its balance of power. In the southwest, the Apache peoples commanded rugged, far-reaching territories, shifting between alliances, warfare, and treaties with Spain. Beyond them, the Navajo, the Pueblo nations, the Hopi, and the Zuni preserved ancient cultural legacies, sustainable agricultural systems, and deeply rooted exchange networks. Across the northern plains, the Sioux, Arapaho, Cheyenne, and Crow nations were advancing into new territories, reshaping the region in the decades to come. Driven by bison migrations and adaptable alliances, they could assemble formidable military coalitions that rivaled any colonial force. Thus, in 1770, North America was neither stable nor fully colonized. It was a continent in motion, a constellation of peoples, empires, cultures, and ambitions, unknowingly poised for a historic detonation, the American Revolution, and the birth of a new nation that would reshape the world. In the 1770s, Britain's colonial framework along the Atlantic coast of North America was vast, diverse, and seemingly solid. The 13 colonies, stretching from the cold forests of New England to the subtropical plantations of Georgia, enjoyed relatively developed local institutions, elected assemblies, colonial charters, their own militias, and a significant degree of self-government in internal affairs. Above them stood royal governors, appointed by the Crown, who served as London's official arm in the colonies. Yet beneath this institutional balance, tensions were steadily building. The ultimate sovereignty of the British Parliament, combined with new fiscal and trade laws after 1763, fueled deep resentment among colonists who considered themselves English by right but unrepresented in the imperial government. By 1770, this contradiction was already evident in ports like Boston, New York, and Philadelphia, where commercial prosperity grew side by side with sharp political criticism. Further north lay British Canada, centered on the province of Quebec. There, London governed a predominantly French-speaking Catholic population accustomed to a legal order rooted in the Ancien Régime. The Quebec Act of 1774 confirmed Catholic religious freedom and preserved French civil law in an effort to secure the loyalty of the St. Lawrence Valley's inhabitants. This pragmatic policy allowed Britain to rule a vast and scattered territory without provoking open rebellion. On the northeastern fringe of the continent, Britain also controlled Nova Scotia, which included what would later become New Brunswick, and Newfoundland, whose value lay more in Atlantic fisheries than in large-scale settlement. To the south, East and West Florida, acquired from Spain in 1763, formed a frontier zone between the Anglo-American colonies and the Spanish world. In theory, the proclamation of 1763 barred colonial expansion beyond the Appalachian Mountains, preserving the lands of the Ohio and Mississippi valleys for indigenous nations. In practice, thousands of Anglo-American settlers ignored that boundary, pushing into native territories with the complicity or resignation of local authorities. Conflict was inevitable. The British frontier advanced almost uncontrollably, driven by population growth, land hunger, and an aggressive colonizing spirit. In the south and west of the continent, Spain ruled the largest territorial unit in North America, the Viceroyalty of New Spain. Its capital, Mexico City, was the most populous, wealthy, and culturally complex city in the Western Hemisphere. From there, authorities governed regions stretching from Central America to the deserts of Sonora, and from the mines of Chihuahua to the emerging missions of California. Since 1763, Spain also held western Louisiana, ceded by France as compensation for its defeat. This vast territory, governed from New Orleans, retained a strong French identity and required careful efforts to secure loyalty. Antonio de Ulloa, first and later Bernardo de Galvez, had to balance diplomacy, reform, and military readiness in a deeply multicultural environment.
Did you know that the famous French Quarter in New Orleans isn't actually that French? If you're looking at the architecture, you're looking at a masterpiece of the Spanish Empire. Why? Because between 1788 and 1794, two massive fires wiped out the original wooden French city. when it came time to rebuild, Spain was in charge, and they said no more wooden fire traps. The Spanish authorities mandated brick and stucco. Why? Because brick doesn't burn like wood, and the colorful stucco protected the soft bricks from the crazy Louisiana humidity. Those famous wrought iron balconies, pure Spanish style, they weren't just for looks. They provided shade and allowed people to catch a breeze above the muddy streets. And my favorite part, the interior courtyards. Spanish builders loved privacy. They built houses right up to the sidewalk, but hidden inside, a secret tropical oasis for the family to escape the heat. So it's called the French Quarter, but it speaks Spanish with every brick. History is full of surprises, right? Follow for more classified curiosities.
By the late 1770s, the Bourbon monarchy launched an ambitious project of modernization and territorial control. In 1776, King Charles III created the Commandancy General of the Internal Provinces, an autonomous jurisdiction within the viceroyalty that encompassed the vast northern frontier arc: California, Sonora, Nueva Vizcaya, Coahuila, Texas, New Mexico, Chihuahua, and more, all regions difficult to defend, sparsely populated, and threatened by rival powers and constant Apache and Comanche raids. The new Commander-General, Teodoro de Croix, was granted extraordinary powers comparable to those of the Viceroy to coordinate presidios, missions, settlement, and military campaigns. Under this structure, forts, towns, and missions were founded or reinforced in an attempt to impose order on a frontier where Spanish authority was more aspiration than reality. In Alta California, for example, the 1769 expedition of Gaspar de Portola and Fray Junipero Serra had begun a colonization process that, throughout the 1770s, would create the chain of missions that would profoundly shape the region's future. In the Pacific Northwest, Spain defended its claims on the basis of first discovery. The expeditions of Juan Perez, 1774, Bruno de Heceta, 1775, and Ignacio de Arteaga, 1779, pushed Spanish exploration as far as the Alaskan coast, though without establishing permanent settlements. Even so, these voyages strengthened Spain's territorial pretensions in the face of a growing Russian presence. In the far north and northwest, European presence was sparse but not insignificant. The Hudson's Bay Company, based in London, claimed an immense subarctic basin around the bay that bears its name. There, the fur trade shaped relations with numerous indigenous nations, even though permanent European settlement remained limited. More troubling for Spain and Britain was Russian expansion. From Siberia, Russian sailors and fur traders, the Promyshleniki, crossed the Bering Strait to the Aleutian Islands and the Alaskan coast, setting up temporary posts and exploiting local wildlife intensively. Their encounters with the Aleut peoples were often violent and deeply exploitative. Russia did not yet have a formal colony in 1770, but this presence was the seat of what would become Russian Alaska. In the northeast, the Iroquois Confederacy, Haudenosaunee, the people of the Longhouse, stood as one of the most sophisticated indigenous political systems in the world. Its alliance encompassed 6 nations: the Mohawk, Oneida, Onondaga, Cayuga, Seneca, and Tuscarora. Their political order rested on a grand council of 50 hereditary chiefs who reached decisions through consensus, while clan mothers held the authority to appoint or remove leaders. Their diplomatic skill, control of trade routes, and military strength made them indispensable to both British and French interests for more than a century. By the 1770s, however, the Confederacy began to fracture. Some nations leaned toward the British, while others sympathized with the emerging American rebels. In the southeast flourished the Creek, Choctaw, Chickasaw, Seminole, and especially the Cherokee, advanced agricultural societies with established towns, written laws, diplomatic councils, and thriving trade networks. Their governments blended councils of elders with both civil and war leadership. They were skilled farmers and active traders who negotiated strategically with British and Spanish officials to safeguard their autonomy. Their carefully chosen alliances would shape the balance of power in the southeast throughout the decade. The Comancheria, stretching across parts of Texas, Oklahoma, Colorado, and New Mexico, was one of the most formidable regions on the continent. The Comanche, masters of the horse and of mobile warfare, had built a true equestrian empire rooted in speed, striking power, and an extensive trading network. Their flexible, band-based political structure allowed them to coordinate large-scale military actions without a centralized authority. Their influence was so great that Spain could not freely expand in Texas or New Mexico. The Comanche determined which borders moved, which remained fixed, and which powers were compelled to negotiate. The Apache, including the Chiricahua, Mescalero, Lipan, Jicarilla, and others, controlled vast mountainous and desert regions of the Southwest. Their social organization revolved around independent family bands guided by consensus and charismatic leadership. They were masters of ambush tactics, mobility, and survival in harsh landscapes. Their relationship with Spain shifted between negotiated peace and open warfare, and their decentralized structure made them extraordinarily difficult to subdue. Their culture, deeply rooted in the land, blended small-scale agriculture, hunting, gathering, and trade with neighboring peoples. In the Southwest, the Pueblo societies, including the Hopi, Zuni, and the many Rio Grande Pueblos, maintained sophisticated agricultural systems, adobe architecture, intricate ceremonial traditions, and trade networks rooted in centuries of continuity. Their clan-based communities preserve one of the oldest cultural lineages on the continent. The Navajo, Diné, expanding through the 18th century, blended farming with sheep herding, and were renowned for their textiles and craftsmanship. Their adaptable social structure allowed them to respond swiftly to political shifts and to make strategic choices along the Spanish frontier. Alongside them, the Ute, Shoshone, Cheyenne, Arapaho, Crow, and many northern plains nations were undergoing major transformations driven by the spread of the horse, the centrality of bison hunting, and the formation of powerful military alliances. In Britain's 13 colonies, the 1770s began with the calm surface of prosperity. Harvests were abundant, commerce with Europe and the Caribbean flourished, and the port cities of Boston, New York, and Philadelphia pulsed with energy and ambition. Yet beneath that surface, resentment ran deep. The 7 Years' War had left Britain burdened with staggering debt, and Parliament decreed that the colonies must now help pay for their own defense. New taxes and trade restrictions followed. The Sugar Act, the Stamp Act, and later, duties on tea and other essentials, all seen by the colonists as unjust impositions from a distant crown. Through 1770 and 1771, distrust hardened into defiance. Merchants and farmers organized boycotts. Towns formed assemblies and committees of correspondence to weave a web of resistance. No taxation without representation became the rallying cry of a generation that had begun to see itself as something new. Not merely British subjects, but Americans. Clashes soon followed. In March 1770, the so-called Boston Massacre left 5 colonists dead after British soldiers fired into a crowd, an event immortalized in prints and pamphlets as proof of tyranny. 3 years later came open rebellion, the Boston Tea Party, when men disguised as Mohawk warriors hurled entire shiploads of tea into the harbor, defying the crown itself. Britain's response was swift and ruthless. The port of Boston closed, the Massachusetts Assembly dissolved, fresh regiments sent to enforce royal order. The so-called Intolerable Acts of 1774 shocked the colonies into unity. For the first time, delegates from nearly every province gathered in Philadelphia, the First Continental Congress, to seek a common course of action. By the eve of 1775, the 13 colonies stood divided, torn between loyalty to the king and the dream of independence. British troops occupied Boston. Local militias stockpiled gunpowder in towns like Concord. The collision was inevitable. At dawn on April 19, 1775, there was no turning back. In the small towns of Lexington and Concord, colonial militias faced British regulars sent to seize their weapons. No one knows who fired the first shot, yet its echo would alter the course of the continent forever. The British reached Concord, but their return to Boston became a running battle. Along every mile, armed farmers struck from behind stone walls and forest edges. The legend of the citizen soldier was born that day. Within weeks, militia from across New England surrounded Boston, beginning a siege that would last nearly a year. In mid-June, on the heights of Charlestown, came the Battle of Bunker Hill. The British took the ground but lost over 1,000 men. The price of victory was so steep that General Howe realized crushing the rebellion would not be easy. Meeting in Philadelphia, the Continental Congress appointed George Washington, a veteran of earlier wars, as commander-in-chief. Under his leadership, the colonial forces began to take shape as a real army, poorly equipped but resolute. Through the harsh winter, Washington reinforced his lines and waited for the moment to drive the British out. That moment came in March 1776. Artillery hauled from Fort Ticonderoga was positioned on the Dorchester Heights overlooking Boston. Facing certain bombardment, the British evacuated the city. For the first time, the rebels had won a strategic victory, and hope spread across the continent. The triumph was short-lived. That same year, the Empire struck back with overwhelming force. Over 30,000 British and Hessian troops landed in New York. Washington's army was beaten on Long Island and driven across New Jersey, leaving behind a trail of defeat and despair.
Did you know that George Washington didn't just win the war with muskets, he won it with secrets? Meet the Culper Ring, the most successful spy network you've probably never heard of. In 1778, the British held NYC like a fortress. Washington was flying blind. He needed eyes inside, so he turned to his director of military intelligence, Benjamin Tallmadge. These weren't James Bonds. They were normal people from Long Island and NYC. Farmers, merchants, even a mysterious woman known only as Agent 355, whose real identity is still a mystery today. Talk about a cold case. Their tech was wild. They used sympathetic stain, basically 18th century invisible ink that required a chemical developer to read. Pro tip: want to signal a pickup? One spy used a specific arrangement of laundry on a clothesline to tell others where to find the dead drop. Did it work? Big time. The Culper Ring was key in uncovering the treason of Benedict Arnold and stopping a British ambush on French allies. Without these townspeople, the war might have ended very differently. So next time you think history is just dusty books, remember, it's actually full of secret codes, laundry signals, and invisible ink. Stay curious.
On Christmas night, 1776, Washington gambled everything. Through ice and storm, he crossed the Delaware River and struck the enemy camp at Trenton. Days later, he triumphed again at Princeton. Small battles in scale, yet they reignited the Army's spirit and kept the Revolution alive. Meanwhile, the indigenous nations of the Northeast watched the conflict with wary eyes. Some of the Iroquois sided with the British, hoping to preserve their homelands. Others sought neutrality. For many, it was a foreign war that would soon spill into their own lands. In barely 2 years, the struggle had evolved from urban riots into a full-scale war for independence. '77 changed everything. General Burgoyne's surrender proved to the world that the rebels could win on open ground. France, Britain's longtime rival, recognized the United States and signed an alliance, turning a colonial revolt into a global war. A year later, Spain would also enter the conflict, though without officially recognizing the new republic. Under King Charles III, the governor of Louisiana, Bernardo de Galvez, launched a series of campaigns that would prove vital to America's fate. From New Orleans, he organized the flow of money, gunpowder, weapons, and supplies to the rebel armies along the Mississippi. In 1779, Galvez personally led the offensive against the British, capturing Baton Rouge, Natchez, and Mobile, and paving the way for the later conquest of Pensacola. His victories secured Spanish control of the Gulf of Mexico and drew British forces away, a diversion that helped make American victory possible. Meanwhile, in the Ohio Valley, young Commander George Rogers Clark seized Kaskaskia and Vincennes, pushing the revolution westward. At sea, Captain John Paul Jones battled the British Navy off their own shores. The war had now engulfed the continent and the oceans beyond. By the decade's end, the conflict was no longer a struggle between colonists and their mother country. Three great European empires and dozens of indigenous nations were now caught in its storm. North America had become the central theater of a world at war. After 1779, the War of Independence entered its decisive phase. What began as a colonial rebellion had become a continental and maritime conflict. France and Spain now fought Britain on multiple fronts, from the Caribbean to the English Channel, stretching the empire's power thin across the globe. In North America, the fighting surged back and forth. British forces held firm in New York and the southern colonies, relying on loyalist allies. Yet the war had changed its nature. It was no longer only a military struggle, but a political and symbolic one. The 13 colonies had declared independence, and every battle was now fought in the name of a new nation. Between 1780 and 1781, the war shifted southward. In the Carolinas, the fighting was brutal. Charleston fell to the British, but American victories at Kings Mountain and Cowpens broke their momentum. General Nathanael Greene waged a campaign of attrition, forcing the enemy back toward the coast. Meanwhile, in the Gulf of Mexico, Bernardo de Galvez pressed on with his offensive. In 1781, after a daring and perilous siege, he captured Pensacola, driving the British from Florida once and for all. It was one of Spain's greatest victories in the Americas, a strategic triumph that eased the pressure on the struggling rebels. That same year, far to the north, the war reached its climax. The British Army under General Cornwallis entrenched itself at Yorktown, Virginia. Washington, aided by the French army under Rochambeau and Admiral de Grasse's fleet, encircled the city. After weeks of relentless bombardment, Cornwallis surrendered on October 19, 1781. Yorktown was more than a military victory. It was the symbolic birth of a nation. In that moment, American troops, their French allies, and the quiet but decisive support of Spain converged to reshape the destiny of a continent. The war dragged on for several months more, but the outcome was clear. In 1783, the Treaty of Paris was signed. Britain formally recognized the independence of the United States. Spain regained Florida and secured its control over Louisiana and the Gulf of Mexico. France, exhausted but vindicated, had avenged its earlier defeat. For the indigenous nations, however, peace brought only uncertainty. Their alliances, whether with the British or the Americans, did not secure their lands or autonomy. In the years to come, many would be driven from their ancestral territories, beginning another, quieter and longer struggle, the fight for cultural survival. Thus ended the war that reshaped the world. A new republic had been born in the north, even as the old European empires redrew their borders. North America entered a new era, the age of the United States, and the redefinition of power across the Western Hemisphere.
Did you know that George Washington's secret weapon for building America wasn't a soldier? It was a Spanish donkey, specifically a giant woolly beast from Zamora, Spain. In 1785, King Charles III of Spain heard that Washington wanted to improve American livestock, so he sent a royal gift, 2 elite Zamorano Leones donkeys. One didn't survive the trip, but the survivor, he became a legend. It wasn't an easy commute. This donkey, named Royal Gift, survived a brutal Atlantic crossing and then had to walk hundreds of miles from Boston to Mount Vernon in the dead of winter. Washington used Royal Gift to create a new breed of American mules. They were stronger than horses and ate less than oxen. They became the engines that plowed the fields and built the infrastructure of the young U.S. economy. People traveled from all over just to have their mares meet the royal gift. Washington even took him on a southern tour. He was basically the first four-legged celebrity in America. So, next time you see a mule, remember, it's a living legacy of Spanish-American friendship. Follow for more classified curiosities.